Welcome to the FY23 Budget Town Hall. We're going to let folks join in and we're going to get started at around 6:03. As you're getting settled, please feel free to answer a poll question that's going to pop up on your screen. We want to know who's in the room, so let us know if you're a resident, a business owner, work here, you're a student. And before we get started, I want to just go over a couple of logistical things. We have live translation tonight available in Spanish, French, and Mandarin. We're working on Vietnamese technical difficulties, but we should have that in a moment. If you go to the bottom of the Zoom screen, you'll see a globe. If you click on that globe, you can select which language you would like to watch in. This will allow you to watch and listen in your preferred language. Closed captioning is also available. And so you can select the CC icon at the bottom of the screen to enable live translation. I also want to let you know that this meeting is being recorded and I have some legal bits that I need to say. This public meeting is being recorded and will be posted online per city ordinance. Your participation in this meeting constitutes consent thereto. So if you decide to stay and participate, you're agreeing to be recorded. If you're joining us by phone this evening, there will be some polls throughout tonight's town hall. And we recognize that you won't be able to participate in those by phone. But we want you to know that we really want to hear your voice. So we will make sure that we are calling you tomorrow, somebody from the budget team, to go through the questions and get your responses. Finally, as a reminder, this town hall is for the public and community members. If any members of the press have questions, they should reach out to the Mayor's Communications Office by emailing press@phila.gov. We're just going to give folks another moment or two as to get in and get registered, and we're going to get started at about 6:03. Thanks so much, and welcome to the FY23 Budget Town Hall. And for folks just joining in, again, welcome to the FY23 Budget Town Hall. We're going to start at about 6:03. If you would like to have translation this evening in Spanish, French, or Mandarin, there is a globe icon on the bottom of your screen. Click that and it will let you choose which language you prefer to watch and listen in. And if you're interested in closed captioning, please click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Now that we've got just about 100 attendees with us here and more folks watching on Facebook Live, with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Mayor Jim Kenney.
Thank you, Marissa, and good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for this important conversation on the City of Philadelphia's fiscal year 2023 budget. I'd like to recognize City Council and the Office of the Director of Finance for their hard work in the budget planning process. Before I begin, I hope you will join me in thanking our incredible city workforce and first responders who have, throughout the pandemic, responded with the tenacity and grace of true public servants, working incredibly hard to meet the changing needs of our residents. Thank you for all that you do for us all. Every year we get together to discuss the most important policy document in city government, the budget. The budget is not just about numbers and spending. It's the representation of the priorities of our city and how we seek to fund the necessary operations, services, and programs that our residents count on, despite limited resources at our disposal. The budget takes our values and turns them into investments, and turns our hopes and goals into plans. That's why it is critical that your voices are heard. As you know, we continue to face urgent issues in our city: recovery from the pandemic, public safety and gun violence, creating economic opportunity for all, and many more issues. The good news is that we are getting federal help, and that does alleviate some of the burden brought on by the pandemic that will allow us to put our dollars into our communities and workforce. The challenge is that we still have limited resources to tackle the many pressing issues facing us every day. We know there is always room for improvement. Moving forward, we want to build our fiscal year 2023 budget so that Philadelphians in every neighborhood can benefit from a strong, inclusive recovery. Our administration is committed to doing everything in our power, not only to restore Philadelphia to what it was before the pandemic, but to ensure we come back even stronger. This budget will align with our 5-year plan to move Philadelphia forward. by providing core services that people depend on, accelerating inclusive economic growth, maintaining the city's long-term fiscal health, and reducing racial disparities. But we need your help to do this. We're here today eager to hear your ideas before the proposed budget is put together. We will cover how a city budget works while giving you time to share your experiences, have your questions answered, and propose ideas. It is now my pleasure to introduce our city officials who will be joining me on this panel. This evening, we have with us Police Commissioner Danielle Outlaw, Streets Commissioner Carlton Williams, Director of Public Planning and Development Ann Fedulin, and incoming Deputy Mayor for the Office of Children and Families and Acting Managing Director Vanessa Garrett Harley. Thank you again for taking the time to join us to lend your voices to this process. We look forward to your questions, thoughts, and ideas. Thank you. And with that, I will turn it over to our Budget Director, Marissa Waxman. Marissa?
Great. Thank you so much, Mayor. Tonight, we're going to share a brief overview of the city's budget and spend the majority of our time together asking our panelists to answer questions about the budget. We'll start by asking questions that were submitted ahead of time. Thank you so much. We had over 300 people register, and most of you submitted questions, and some real themes emerged. We also have a Q&A feature, so at the bottom of the screen, you can pose questions. If we have time, we'll do some more of the ones that are submitted that way. And also, please use that as an opportunity to tell us what you care about and what's most important to you that the city provide in the coming year. We have budget office staff monitoring that Q&A, and so we'll also be trying to answer as many of those questions as we can in real time. And please, again, we will make sure that we gather all of your comments and it will be used as we put together the budget this year. Also, after our Q&A, we're going to do a few quick polls to get your feedback to close out the night. And as I mentioned before, if you're on the phone tonight, not able to participate in the poll, we'll be giving you a call tomorrow to make sure that we have the opportunity to get your input. And so before we get into the Q&A, we did want to show a short video about how our annual budget process works. Thanks so much.
Hey Philly, just like you, the city of Philadelphia needs money to keep things running. Let's talk about how our annual city budget works. The budget is the annual plan with a price tag for the city of Philadelphia's programs and services. Decisions around how the city spends resources can impact the quality of life of businesses, residents, and visitors. The city divides its budget into two main types, operating and capital. The operating budget funds day-to-day services and programs, like trash collection and building inspections. The capital budget funds long-term major infrastructure investments, like recreation centers and fire engines. The Philadelphia Home Rule Charter requires the city to produce a balanced budget. This means our revenues and reserves must fully cover our spending. The budget is organized around the city's programs and services. Organizing the budget this way provides a clear picture of how much money is being spent on each program, what that service is, and how well the program is performing. For example, the Streets Department measures on-time trash collection, which helps the city to see how well that service is working and the value of our investment in trash collection. Let's start with talking about our operating budget. Each year, the Budget Office works with city government department leaders to prepare an operating budget. In addition to an annual budget, the Budget Office also creates a 5-year strategic and financial plan, which helps the city plan ahead by projecting revenues and spending over a longer period of time. Before we can decide how we want to spend our money, we must first figure out what our projected revenues will be. The largest portion of our revenues come from local taxes, like the wage tax. Other funding comes from fines and fees, aid from state and federal governments, and revenue from other city funds. When we are putting together the operating budget, we first look at what services and programs are currently provided and how much they will cost next year. We also look at the costs the city is required to pay for each year. We call these fixed or inflexible costs. Over 50% of the general fund is made up of fixed and inflexible costs. This means that less than half of the city's general fund budget is unrestricted and up for discussion each year. After establishing our fixed and inflexible costs, we look at what new or expanded services and programs the city can offer. Since we need to produce a balanced budget, not every new project can be funded. When making decisions about what will be funded and what won't, city leaders utilize feedback from people like you to understand community needs. They also must consider legal and constitutional requirements and the impact on racial disparities and other factors. Now let's discuss the capital budget. The capital budget allows the City of Philadelphia to make long-term investments in physical things like buildings, roads, and infrastructure, and in major information technology systems that help run the city. Each year, an annual capital budget is produced, as well as a 6-year capital program, since many projects takes years to complete. The capital budget is funded by many different sources. Most of the money has requirements and must be spent in specific ways. However, the city makes decisions on a portion of that money each year. The operating and capital budget follow a similar development process. In the fall, city departments submit operating and capital budget requests to the Budget Office and City Planning Commission. Throughout the winter, the Budget Office reviews the budget requests and projected revenues. For capital budget requests, the City Planning Commission works in coordination with the Budget Office to review budget proposals. Both agencies gather public input from community stakeholders to understand the requests and community needs. In early spring, the mayor submits recommended operating and capital budgets to the City Council. During the spring, City Council holds hearings to learn more from departments and gather community feedback on both the operating and capital budget. City Council must adopt the operating and capital budget before July 1st. During the budget process, you can help influence how the city decides to spend its resources. A few examples of how you can take part are through surveys, focus groups, town halls, and public hearings. The budget represents the City of Philadelphia's commitment to tackling its biggest challenges, including providing a safe and just city, health equity for all, and quality education for all Philadelphians. Amid all the charts and numbers of the budget is a core goal to increase equity and opportunity so that you can reach your full potential, regardless of what corner of the city you live in. To learn more about the City of Philadelphia's operating and capital budget, please visit phila.gov/finance.
And I hope everyone found that to be informative and useful. I wanted to give you a little bit more specific information about where we are right now before we get into the Q&A. And again, I want to remind folks, please use the Q&A to ask questions and to give us your ideas and recommendations. So right now we are in fiscal year 2022, fiscal years start July 1st. And our general fund, which is our main operating budget fund where we pay for standard city services, each year or this year, we're expecting to collect a little over $5 billion. And we're going to spend around $5.35 billion. The revenues are a bit less than we had initially expected, even with over $250 million in federal relief being drawn down and used this year. And our expenses are a bit higher than anticipated for a couple of different reasons having to do with supply chains, inflation, and a lot going on. At the end of the year, we're expecting to have about $134 million left in the bank in something we call the fund balance. And while on the one hand, that seems like a huge amount of money, and it is, it's only about 9 days worth of city spending. So it doesn't give us a lot of room in case new things come up or bad snowstorms or, any sort of emergency. And so as we're putting together the budget, we're trying to make sure that we are estimating our revenues accurately. We're forecasting our expenses and making sure they align with the needs of Philadelphians, and that we have a little bit of cushion left over, perhaps more than a little bit, for any emergency that pops up. And so as we're making these decisions, and Helen, if you want to go to the next slide, we are thinking about a lot of different things. Philadelphia has a lot of long-standing challenges that we're trying to address, like high poverty, aging infrastructure, challenges with violence and public safety. We also need to address systemic and institutionalized racism. We're operating with a complex and pretty burdensome tax structure, and we've got high fixed costs and not much cushion. And those are challenges we've been navigating for some time, but in the past 2 years, we've got new uncertainties. We've got the path of the coronavirus and also the changes that's having on our economy. We've gotten a lot of federal funding, a tremendous amount, but unfortunately, it's still less than the amount of tax revenue we've lost as a result of the pandemic. So it's not quite filling that hole. We've got challenges, as I mentioned, with inflation, supply chain, and labor shortages. So as we're putting together the budget, we're going to have to make some tough decisions. And that's why it's really important to hear from Philadelphians about what's most important to them and how they would want us to be prioritizing. So now that we've learned a little bit about how the budget is put together and what we're thinking about as we move into FY23, fiscal year 23, I'd like to get started with our panel tonight. I'm going to be asking a couple of questions that were submitted by folks who registered in advance. And my first question is actually for the mayor, and it was submitted by Jamie S. And it asks, what are the city's plans to address the inequality, poverty, and debt that plague the city's residents through toxic schools, gun violence, and other pressing issues? Mayor?
Well, the city of Philadelphia is taking numerous steps to address inequality, poverty, and debt that plague our city's residents, including real investments in education like PHL pre-K. We're going to continue to expand to offer additional seats for two families while maintaining a commitment to quality and a 90% enrollment. We're going to expand 3 new community schools for a total of 20 schools. These community schools provide many, many services to children in neighborhoods that are struggling and children in need. We have diversion programs out of school time, truancy intervention and prevention services called TIPS, education stability services through the Education Support Center. Our anti-poverty approach is investing in a multi-generational approach to lift residents out of poverty and break the cycle for future generations. We need to stabilize households and homes. And some of the examples of what we've done to do that is rental assistance, food distribution, taxpayer relief, and increasing affordable housing options. We need to increase incomes in our city. So we have shown support for the tax preparation and child tax credit outreach. And we want to invest in the long game. Examples are $1.4 billion to school district over the next 5 years and funding 4,000 PHL pre-K seats each year. When it comes to equity, the city's Office of Diversity and Equity and Inclusion is committed to creating a more equitable Philadelphia where race, ethnicity, disability, gender identity, sexual orientation, income, or neighborhood are not a determinant of your success. These equity strategies include all city departments must complete a racial equity action plan and create a framework for accountability, transparency, and shared learning in connection with the city's race equity initiative. We're implementing a citywide DEI plan template that will allow the city to consistently track and measure progress toward diversity, education, and inclusion objectives. Thanks, Marissa.
Great. Thank you so much, Mayor. It's really helpful to hear what we're doing in terms of education, anti-poverty, and equity. And also thank you, Jamie, for that question. Our next question comes from Emily S. in Brewerytown. And she asks, how is resident input factored into the decision-making for the annual budget? And so first, Emily, I'll start with the budget office response, which events like this right now, I'm monitoring the chat and seeing the questions and ideas that are coming in. My staff is taking notes. But we also do a number of other things. For example, and this is before we even come up with a proposal that we present to the mayor. We're also doing a series of focus groups over the next couple of weeks with Philadelphians. And those are going to be much smaller opportunities with 15, 20 people so that we can really dig in and get to the nitty gritty. And we're working right now there have been hundreds of folks who've applied, and we're making sure that those are demographically representative. In the past, we've done free surveys that are really easy, and we got more than 10,000 responses. But when we looked at it, we realized it wasn't that representative. So we want to make sure that that we are hearing from Philadelphians, all Philadelphians, and focusing on communities that have typically not been part of the process. There's also opportunities for public input after the budget has been introduced. City Council holds hearings, and that creates another opportunity for residents to share their recommendations before the budget's passed. But beyond talking to the budget office, there are many city departments that are interacting regularly with the residents. They're much closer to the people they serve. And so I'm hoping Deputy Mayor Fedulin can talk a bit about how resident inputs incorporated into the budget process for her.
Sure. Thanks, Melissa. As Marissa said, I'm Ann Fedulin, and I'm head of planning and development for the city of Philadelphia. And really, resident engagement is at the heart of everything we do in our department. For example, as part of the city's comprehensive plan, referred to as the Phila 2035 plan, the City Planning Commission held more than 50 meetings across the city. We had several thousand participants at those meetings as a total. And we continue to meet out in communities with residents. A couple examples of those are projects that we're working on at Broad, Germantown, and Erie, and then also on 25th Street, where we are exploring improvements along the railroad overpass there. In addition, on more of our housing side, when we developed our assessment of fair housing, which we did in 2016, we conducted resident surveys in cooperation with a lot of our community development corporations, our civic associations, the Philadelphia Housing Authority, and our neighborhood advisory councils. And we ended up getting several thousand survey respondents there. It is now time for us to update that plan. So we will be coming out with another survey shortly. And so we hope that everybody takes the opportunity, looks on the website for the Department of Planning and Development, and particularly our Division of Housing Community Development, and accesses that survey and tells your friends and family members to also access the survey and take it. There's a lot of questions there about how you feel about your neighborhood, the quality of your housing, and those types of things that we then use to put together our plans going forward. And another thing with the Department of Planning and Development is ourselves with our sister agency, the Philadelphia Housing Development Corporation. We oversee about 14 boards and commissions, the majority of which meet on a monthly basis and all incorporate the opportunity for public participation and comment. So there are many opportunities every month to address various members of our staff and these various boards that have a lot of decision-making powers within the city. Given all of that, we know that we can do better. And so we are now working with the steering committee that includes about 30 community representatives, and also another about 30 individuals on that steering committee that represent various offices within the city. So for example, the Office of Black Male Engagement and the Office of Immigrant Affairs and those kinds of folks, to make sure that we are getting as much representation as possible as we think about how we start thinking through the next process for the city's next comprehensive plan. We want to do engagement in a different way. We want to make sure that the voices that traditionally have not been heard get heard, have a seat at the table, have a voice at the table. So before we even start the comprehensive plan, we are going through, working through this community, or the steering committee, to help us develop what the community engagement plan will look like. So it's really important for us to hear from the community, because that's who we plan for, right? That's who we do projects for. And so although it's a huge part of what we do, we are always looking for ways to do it better.
Great. Thank you so much, Deputy Mayor. And it's great to hear there's so many opportunities all throughout the year, not just in budget season, where community members can get involved. And so I'm sure folks will be looking for those opportunities. Our next question, actually, many of you submitted similar questions. And so this one is really for our Streets Commissioner, Carlton Williams. Folks are really interested in knowing, what exactly are the plans for trash and sanitation? We definitely struggled with that during the pandemic, and we want to know, what are you doing about it and what's going to happen?
Rightfully so. Thanks, Marissa, and good evening, members of our government and certainly our citizens of Philadelphia. Thank you for allowing me to join you this evening to talk about this very important time in the budget for the city of Philadelphia. To say that we have been severely impacted by the pandemic is an understatement when it comes down to trash and recycling collections. The city of Philadelphia, like many other municipalities across the country, experienced a 30% increase in the amount of trash. That equates to about another day and a half of trash that our trash collectors have to collect on any given day. If you couple that with the amount of people who are also impacted by COVID directly and indirectly, either catching the virus or we're having to deal with family members to catch the virus, we had decreased staff and shortages. Throughout the pandemic, the mayor and our department worked feverishly to hire additional people. We brought in 120 part-time employees who we tried to make permanent. And what we're doing for this fiscal year is to add an additional shift to ensure that any trash that is left over at 3 o'clock is collected before the next day. This will guarantee that our trash is collected on the same day, if not on time, as we work to improve our collection processes. One of the things that we're happy to see as well as businesses and people begin to return back to work, the amount and the volume of trash is starting to decrease, and that will also assist in making sure that trash and recycling is on time. In addition, we are actually working and using technology to help monitor trash collection routes. All of our trucks are now equipped with GPS technology. We can see where a truck is at any given day and any given time to ensure that they're on their routes and working as efficiently and effectively as possible. And in addition, we've had some major challenges, not only with trash delays, but with illegal dumping throughout the city of Philadelphia. I would say that is probably our #1 challenge facing the sanitation division right now. People who just roguely go out and dump in locations on corners and abandoned lots. And so what we've done and will continue to do is to try to increase the number of cameras that we have on our existing network. We added 150 additional cameras in addition to the 500 that is already on the police department's website. We've added additional 150 cameras to monitor illegal dumping sites. This is an ongoing challenge for us in the city of Philadelphia, and we need all of us, all community partnerships to work together to address those who treat our city like a trash can. If you see illegal dumping, report it immediately. We will certainly try to address it. We will try to get tag numbers through surveillance cameras and to lock those people up who come in and dump illegally in our city. Residents also have to do their part. Please follow the rules and regulation when it comes down to trash set outs. Please don't take your trash and set it on corners or in lots. Place it in front of your residents and wait for us to collect it on trash day. Those are some of the things that residents can do to assist us. In addition to illegal dumping, we're also continuing the expansion of our citywide mechanical street cleaning program. We've already started in 4 neighborhoods and we'll expand to an additional 14 neighborhoods come this spring. Our street cleaning program is also predicated on the fact that people must move their cars so that we can do an effective job getting litter off the streets of the city of Philadelphia. Our goal over the next 6 years is to expand to a citywide program where every street in the city of Philadelphia will be cleaned at least a number of times throughout the year. One of the final things that we want to talk about as well is that we use data. We use the litter index to determine our most vulnerable populations and communities where we start. And so that's where we've been addressing our illegal dumping and mechanical street cleaning program throughout the area. But we want to encourage residents to continue partnering with us. We have the Philly Spring Cleanup that will come up April 2nd. We're encouraging them to be block captains. All of these things help keep a safer and cleaner Philadelphia. Thank you, Marissa.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner. I know that was certainly a hot topic, and I can even see in the chat right now, there's a lot of folks asking questions about that. We also got a lot of questions in advance around public safety being a big concern, and folks want to know what we're doing to make residents feel more safe and how it's being incorporated in the budget. And so first, I'd maybe like to ask Madam Acting Managing Director, if you could speak to some of the anti-violence initiatives.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to be here this evening as we discuss this important topic of the budget and the anti-violence initiatives that have taken place. It is very clear that this is an area of major concern to everyone in the city, myself, the mayor, and all of our administration included. This is one of the #1 priorities for us, is trying to tackle the violence, in particular the gun violence that we have been seeing in our city. The anti-violence initiatives are one of the methods in which we are trying to do that. The administration has invested a record number of about $155 million into different anti-violence initiatives this year. Just to give you an example of how important we believe this is, that funding includes investment in different areas, including community empowerment, healing, employment and careers, prevention, and safe havens for youth and families. To give you some examples of what that means when I say that, when we talk about community empowerment, we know that crime is a very complex issue and very, very difficult to solve. And it's not just in Philadelphia, it's across the country, as I'm sure you've heard and seen in the media. It takes all of us to tackle this issue around violence and to try to make sure that we can reduce it and win our neighborhoods back and restore them to the healthy and healing places that we want them to be. And in that regard, the community partners are extremely important, and we're investing funds into folks that are in the community. There are many organizations and grassroots organizations and others who have been doing this work, trying to tackle anti-violence for years, but they had not been able to get any city funding. We have now invested in them with something that we most recently gave out called community expansion grants. Those grants could have gone up to $1 million. Some people got as much of $1 million, or their organizations did, in order to do work that will help us to try to, in particular, try to reduce the gun violence. And then we also had targeted community investment grants, or TCIG, we call them. And those grants could go up to as high as $50,000 for some of your smaller organizations or programs or projects. So there were investments there. When we talk about safe havens for youth and families, we invested over $2 million in community evening resource centers. And therefore, young people who are out, let's say after curfew, and or young people who need a place and a resource to go to, and they provide a myriad of services there for those young people. We have them in 2 parts of the city right now, and we'll be continuing to work on trying to do expansion. There's currently one that's in West and Southwest Philadelphia, and then one in South Philadelphia at the current time. It also, when you talk about safe havens, it's including things like our free libraries and other places that children and youth and or families would go to when we make those kind of investments. When we talk about healing, we're talking about the injury prevention unit that we started with our health department. We all know that gun violence is a public health crisis, and we need that public health approach to try and determine what are the underlying social determinants, both of crime, and then just what we're trying to tackle, the immediate intervention and prevention, but also trying to get to the systemic root causes of what has caused the crime in the first place. And so those kind of hospital-based interventions is included under that. Some of the 911 triage and co-responder type models that we've been talking about with our behavioral health system, along with our criminal justice partners, are all those kinds of investments. And when we look at employment and careers, when we are trying to assist and trying to change the trajectory of the lifestyle that some of folks who are involved in some of the criminal activity, one of the first things we're asked for about is employment. And so there's money that was given both to our Commerce Department to help develop some jobs and sort of workforce and work readiness programs. There is some funding that we do within some of our other prevention intervention programs as part of our gun violence intervention program, GBI. You may have heard us talk about them. We also try to link people with employment and work readiness skills. So that's just some examples of the anti-violence initiatives that we have on the way. And then, as many of you may or may not know, we started a roadmap for safer communities, which is the city's strategy for fighting the gun violence. There was a recent update done in 2021. And a lot of the things that we're talking about in terms of investment directly linked to the strategies that are outlined in that roadmap and the working of all of the inner workings of the various criminal justice partners, as well as our communities, in trying to address these issues.
Thank you. And Commissioner Outlaw, can you share what is going on with policing then?
Sure. Unfortunately for us in 2020, the pandemic hit and we were forced to identify areas where we could cut. And so we currently are working at staffing levels that are about 10% less than where we were in 2015. So while there's a belief that we're still operating with 6,500, even 6,600 sworn officers here, we're not. We're at about 5,900. With all of that said, looking back at 2020, 2021, we all know that we hit record numbers of non-fatal shootings and homicides. Last year, 562 families that won't see their loved ones. again, we recognize even more so that regardless of the resources that we have available, we have to even be super more focused and precise with identifying those individuals, a small group of individuals that are responsible for the largest percentage of the violent crime that we're seeing here. So with that said, violent crime obviously is the #1 priority for us moving forward into 2022. And it forced us to not only go back to the drawing board to really reassess how we could redeploy the resources that we have. So with that said, it's no secret, our clearance rates, our homicide clearance rates, our non-fatal shooting clearance rates were frankly very, very low for a plethora of reasons. We know that witnesses aren't coming forward. We know that the detectives' caseloads have increased because we had the same number of detectives in investigating much larger numbers of caseloads. And so I'm hoping by the end of February, I'll be able to promote some more detectives to put them into a newly formed non-fatal shooting team. And this team will focus on, non-fatal shootings investigations citywide. They will have the same number of, not number, but the same types of resources that our homicide investigators have, which is a direct conduit to the DA's office, technology analysts specifically assigned to them to ensure that we're focusing on solving these non-fatal shootings, because we know that not only will that serve as a deterrent, but that will prevent future homicides. So those are two things. We've also moved officers out of specialized units and put them, back where they can be visible, more boots on the ground, because we know that when we increase our visibility, when we're talking about short term, when we're talking about enforcement, right? We know that when we increase our visibility, that also serves as a deterrent. We're also strengthening our relationships with our local, state, and federal partners, whether it's via task forces or through smaller regional initiatives. For example, we know that we've seen just a crazy increase in carjackings here in the city, not just here in the city, but all over the country. But there's a regional impact here. Either these cars are being stolen from neighboring counties and brought into Philadelphia, or the individuals responsible are coming out of the city and ending up in the city, or vice versa. And so we've put together a regional task force that I'm hoping we can hit the ground running with some resources from the FBI as well to help us get ahead of this moving forward, so we don't have to enter February with the same type of numbers that we've been seeing already in this time of the month. In addition to that, we are looking at using DNA analysis in a different way. We're going to start piloting that with our homicides, moving forward. And if we see a high number of success surrounding that, we'll look to expand that. But again, it's going to take funding to be able to do that. But we're doing what we can right now to be as precise as possible with the resources that we have through other force multipliers, through partnerships, and then also staying in very close contact and communication with those who are providing the services. The pandemic exacerbated a lot of the issues with access that we saw even before the pandemic. And so because we know lack of access to wealth, capital, income, housing, education, all of these things, just food, we know that these are drivers to the gun violence that we're seeing. So making sure that our officers are well aware and trained and knowing what they see when they see it and come upon it, given that we are first responders, it's important for us that our officers know who to call in order to get ahead of that on the prevention piece, because typically our shooters or those who are victims of violent crime here have been involved or on the receiving end of lack of access in some of these categories in the past. So that's just a high level nutshell, but we have a lot of things in play, and I appreciate the community's engagement in this as well. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. And, I'm sitting here watching the chat and I'm seeing how many folks are sharing, that they are scared and they do want these programs and want to be involved because they want to feel better. So thank you for sharing your plans and strategies. Our next question is for both the mayor and deputy mayor Fadul. Folks had a lot of questions about, COVID is not over, it's still happening. And so how are we addressing the various needs for vaccination and testing? But also then what are we doing to help residents and businesses who have been so impacted by this?
Yeah, you're right. Our fight against COVID-19 is far from over, but we have learned a lot during the course of this process. We know now more than ever that creating a thriving city truly depends on the health of all of its communities. We must continue to provide our Department of Public Health, Office of Emergency Management, and other agencies with the resources required to effectively combat COVID-19 and the variants. We need to ease the burden of COVID-19 on minorities and vulnerable populations through effective contact tracing, expanded testing options, and targeted outreach campaigns. Through improved electronic reporting, rapidly identify and prevent further spread of new cases. We have to monitor performance of community testing sites to ensure underserved communities are reached. Additionally, the city plans to, as cases decrease, conduct full-scale case investigation and contact tracing for cases in the city to bridge any gaps that cannot be controlled by availability of an effective vaccine. We need to maintain a mobile testing unit to rapidly address outbreaks, as well as bring increased capacity to underserved neighborhoods. We have to increase outreach so that the division can better support the community through trusted partnerships. We provide support to partners and communities in containing outbreaks, including swift availability of testing and support for guidance on isolation and quarantine. But we also have to support our workers. We know the past couple of years have been very challenging, not just for businesses, but also for workers who help power our community. To that end, the city has partnered with local philanthropy and trusted community leaders to provide about $2.2 million to over 2,800 working families who have been left out of federal COVID-19 relief. In 2021, the Department of Labor conducted over 60 multilingual events for both workers and businesses on workplace protection laws, for example, paid sick leave. Cross-departmental partnerships between labor, the Philadelphia Department of Public Health, and the Commerce Department has been important in creating support for both workers and employers who keep workers safe when they should isolate, quarantine, and to prevent violations of labor laws before they happen. I'd like to turn to Ann Fedulin now for what we're doing for our businesses.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Before we get into businesses, I just want to say one of the other big supports that we're doing for our folks, unfortunately, that lost their jobs during the pandemic is providing rent relief. We've provided rent support for over 30,000 households. We put over $200 million on the street. Unfortunately, we know we've just scratched the surface of the need, and we are working very hard to see if we can get additional dollars from both the state and the federal government, because this is a huge issue, right? We know that all of this begins at home. You know, the first thing that happened in the pandemic is people were told to stay home, and we have way too many people that don't have homes. And so we know how important it is to ensure a safe house for everybody and a home for everybody. And we are working very hard towards that. But again, we burned through almost over $200 million to provide this support. We probably need an additional $350 million. And we would like to see that support continuing. So we are working and lobbying very hard, like I said, at both the state and the federal level. But every voice that can speak or say or sing or talk or whatever, we need you all united in order to get that support. And, you know, so in addition to our residents, which are a huge asset, we are also providing support for businesses. That's done through the city's Commerce Department. They have done an incredible job through the pandemic to support small businesses through, again, a lot of the federal programs and stimulus that came through by providing grants and loans to small businesses. But they also have some key programs that they're running, workforce solution grants, which train job seekers for specific jobs with targeted employers. They also are doing workforce system alignment, again, with attaching workforce development programs directly with the needs that employers have and making sure that the training that folks are getting matches up with the job market. They also have an Office of Business Services that helps assist businesses trying to get through any approval processes with the city. They have a Biz Coach program that helps provide technical assistance to business owners to, again, try to figure out how to build their business and access city services. And one of the other key things is they have a acquisition loan fund so that business owners can buy their actual real estate that their business is in. So, because just, you know, as much as residential population is at risk of being displaced, the business owners are also at risk of being displaced if they don't own their real estate. So they're really working on that. And then they have their in-store and their Boost Your Business programs that provide up to $50,000 in forgivable loans to minority-owned businesses that are working to scale up their operations. There's just a lot of effort across the board to try to support our businesses, our work, get our folks back to work. We know how important that is, as important as having a home. We know it's important to have a job, to be able to support yourselves, be able to support your families. So folks are really working on that. And we really work in close association with our Commerce Department. And we thank them for all the work they're doing to support businesses.
Thank you so much, Deputy Mayor. So we've actually managed to get through all the pre-submitted ones we had prepped to talk about. So actually what I'd like to do now is take some questions based on what we're seeing in the chat tonight. And so this might be a little bit, or actually, what I'll do is I'll read out a couple. So we have Mark Zachary asked a question about why isn't the L&I budget being considered for a significant increase? And he talks about code enforcement being critical and its relationship to violence. Before I ask the Madam Acting Managing Director to speak, I do want to note that the budget isn't done yet. That's part of what we're doing here tonight. So we're checking to see, what are you interested in? And that's all going to factor in. So the decisions haven't been made. But would you mind speaking to L&I and talking about, what's important, what's going on over there and their plans for the future?
Sure, we do. L&I is a very important department within the city, as we know that they try to ensure safety in city buildings, structures, as well as they have a number of other enforcement mechanisms, which I think is what the question was going to, as around the enforcement. They are certainly assessing their staffing, looking at their staffing. There will be some action probably for additional staff in certain areas. Code enforcement is one of those. We are pursuing a program with the Community College of Philadelphia, where there will be a curriculum that's being developed that we hope will be starting soon, where we can start developing some code enforcement officers. Some of these jobs are hard to recruit for. And if we start this type of a program, not only does it will also help us in terms of equity, in terms of what the workforce looks like at L&I, but it will also provide that folks can go in and actually do a curriculum. And when they graduate, will be prepared to pass whatever tests they would need to pass and be able to be directly hired into those code enforcement jobs. So we'll develop a direct pipeline for us to be able to hire. But that has not stopped them from doing the job that they are required to do, which is to try and ensure the safety of, buildings and businesses, as well as enforce codes, regulations, and issue permits. And to the extent that permits need to be withdrawn from some of these places that are particularly around the violence work, there is a big push around the nuisance businesses and other things or that sometimes help filter some of the violence that we see. They are working closely with other criminal justice partners, including the Liquor Control Board at the state, our police department, health department, and many others, as we go in and try to monitor these facilities and make sure that we keep them as in control as possible. L&I also works on the blight conditions in many of these communities that we see for, open and abandoned homes, or we do what we call clean and seal, where they clean these homes out and they seal them up so that they cannot be used for illegal activities, and also to make it safer for the residents. And we try and, to the extent that we can, employ some staff from the neighborhoods so that you are also putting some economy back into the neighborhoods that we're trying to revitalize.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think next I'm going to have a question for Deputy Mayor Ann Fedulin, because I'm looking in the chat and the Q&A, and I'm seeing questions around eviction prevention, and also like, how do folks get assistance? And what are we going to be doing going forward in terms of affordable housing and eviction prevention?
Sure. So during the pandemic, we started an eviction diversion program, which is before a tenant can be evicted, the landlord must, while we have rent assist available, the landlord must apply for rental assistance in cooperation with the tenant. And then also there must be mediation between the landlord and the tenant to try to work out a system before, so, to try to stave off eviction. It's not perfect. It doesn't mean that no evictions are happening, but there has been a drastic reduction in the amount of evictions that have occurred as a result of this program. I will say this again, right? We've spent over $200 million in rent assist money that we got from the federal government. We are trying to get additional dollars. We're trying to look for every single dollar under every seat cushion and, you know, everything we can to get more money to put at this. But if those funds run dry, as we know, the biggest reason why folks get evicted is because unfortunately they're not able to pay their rent. And so without rent assistance, it's going to be very, very difficult for us to avoid these evictions. And the other key thing here, right, is that most of the affordable housing provided in Philadelphia is provided by private small landlords. So mom and pops that maybe own 1 to 4 units. So they also can't hold on to those units for any length of time if they're not getting rent, because then they can't pay their mortgage and they're at risk of losing those units. We know how important those units are to our market, and we can't risk those units being lost. I don't know if anybody's paying attention to what's going on in other cities, but big investment groups are starting to buy up these types of properties. And then, you know, even ownership properties as they come up out of mortgage foreclosure and turn them into rental properties where they're just interested in making a huge profit. So we really are trying to pay attention to both sides of the equation, both the renter and the small landlord, and doing what we can in order to make sure that that tenant has a safe place to live and that that landlord can hold on to the property. But again, you know, if these rental assistance funds dry up, it's not going to be easy. And I do want to thank the voters and the residents of the city for approving some additional dollars to go to the Housing Trust Fund. Many of those dollars will be used to put towards rent assist.
Great, thank you for that. I'm seeing a bunch of different questions in the chat around tax and, you know, why do we have this tax and not that? What are we doing with incentives? And I just wanted to take a moment to say that right now, City Council has convened a tax reform working group, and they are in the process of developing recommendations. And so that's something else that we'll be using as an input into when we develop this budget. So there's groups thinking about, do we have the right mix of taxes? You know, who pays how much? And so that is also something we're looking at. Folks asked, you know, why in the chat have our revenues not performed? One of the big reasons this year, obviously with COVID, a lot of folks were hurting, businesses hurt, so that's less revenue from them. But we also had shifts in how the economy works. We used to get significant revenue from commuters coming in who paid our wage tax, but when they are at the direction of their bosses staying outside the city in the burbs or New Jersey, obviously that tax is no longer due to us. And so we've seen that, you know, as the economy changes, our tax structure might need to change a bit as well. I do want to ask just one last question to the mayor that a lot of folks have been in the chat interested to know. What are we doing about education? What's important? We know some of folks have asked about the soda tax and pre-K. And so can you tell us a bit more about your thoughts on education?
Well, I think it's important that we fund education here in Philadelphia when Harrisburg has over the years refused to, as a matter of fact, has reduced the amount of money that we've gotten for our schools. And that's despite the best efforts of our state representatives and state senators here in Philadelphia who work hard along with the governor every day to try to get more resources for our schools. But the Republican-led legislature, both in the House and Senate, over the years, over the last 20 years, have consistently reduced the amount of money allocated to our schools. That's why we're in court right now, awaiting a decision on a fair funding formula. But we decided that we should try to replace that money. We've put about a $1.5 billion into our schools since we've come into office. And we've again funded pre-K, funded community schools through the beverage tax, which has been very successful. And we will continue to provide whatever resources we can while still working hard, both in the court and in the legislature and in the federal government, get as much money as possible for our kids. We will never turn the corner on poverty unless we have a thorough and efficient education for all of our children at every level, public schools, charter schools, private parochial schools. We need our children educated in order to take the jobs of the next 10, 20 years. And we will continue till I'm done here to continue to do that.
Great. Thank you so much, Mayor. And thank you, panelists, for your responses, but particularly thank you, audience members. There's no way we were going to be able to get through all the questions tonight, but seeing what you asked tells us what you care about and what's important. And we do want to hear a little bit more from you and learn a bit more about your priorities and your preferences. So I'm going to turn it over to my budget colleague, Helen Lawhead, who's going to take us through some polls. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're joining us by phone, we're going to give you a call tomorrow. It's going to be Marissa from the budget office, but not me, the other Marissa in the budget office. who will give you a call and make sure that you have a chance to answer this survey as well. So Helen, please.
Thank you, Marissa. Okay, so the first poll that we're going to do today is going to ask you about your priorities and preferences. And you should be seeing that on your screen now. So we're asking, what should the city prioritize in the next fiscal year? Select your top 3 choices. And those choices include anti-violence, neighborhood services, education, business and workforce development, arts and culture, infrastructure, support for vulnerable people. You might have to scroll down as well to see more choices. We have public health, public safety, and other. And if you select other, please feel free to throw that in the chat. We're getting a lot of responses coming through. We're up to about 40 so far out of our 132 participants. So we'll give just a few more seconds for everyone to add their vote. And I'm seeing in the chat, other as in housing, infrastructure is more than just roads, thinking about access to internet, other as in taxes as well. I'm seeing trains, bike lanes. So I'm going to end this poll now and we'll see the results here. So you can see that our top choice was education, followed by some neighborhood services like rec centers. We have support for vulnerable people, homeless services, DHS. Great. So thank you for responding to that poll. We're going to launch our second poll. And this poll is asking you, how should the city pay for increased need for city services? And please just select one answer. So we have increased taxes, cut spending, both increase taxes and cut spending, or reallocate current spending, spend less in one area and spend more in the other. And we will give this poll maybe, let's see, 10 more seconds. We're up to about 70, 80 participants responding. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll now. So last minute here. Okay, and our number 1 choice here is to reallocate current spending, followed by increased taxes, then both, and the last one is cut spending. So we can see that we don't want to cut spending to our current services, and reallocate is our number 1. So thank you for responding to our polls today. And as a reminder, you will receive a call from the budget office if you called in by phone tonight. And before I turn it back over to Mayor Kenney for closing remarks, I wanted to say thank you again to our panelists and our attendees for joining this evening. And Mayor Kenney, could you please close us out?
Thank you very much. And I also want to thank community members who are participating in the budget process through the town hall and our city budget community focus group for your thoughtful questions. It is so important in Philadelphia's budget as the input of the communities of impacts, especially our communities of color. Your feedback will play an important role in the fiscal year 2023 budget proposal that our administration will submit to City Council. So stay tuned for future updates as we continue this process. And thank you, everyone. Have a good night. And if it does snow a lot, just be careful and try to stay indoors. God bless.